I'm Mike Dowdy, and this is the School Leadership Show. Welcome to the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders realize their potential, advance their careers, and achieve work-life balance. The School Leadership Show brings together the greatest minds from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. This is the show we wish we had 20 years ago. This show is about you. We're here to help you become the best school leader you can be while still having a life outside of work. In this episode, I go another round with educator and author Kim Marshall. This time we talk in detail about teacher observation and evaluation and ways to make the process meaningful and doable for everyone involved. Kim shares several resources, including a tool that districts might consider using to help streamline the paperwork involved with the process. You can access much of Kim Marshall's work for free at marshallmemo.com. His weekly Marshall Memo helps countless educators stay current on what's happening in K-12 education. Enjoy this interview with Kim Marshall. And please send your comments, questions, and show ideas to Mike at schoolleadershipshow.com. Consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment, and please pass the show along to your colleagues. So welcome back, Kim Marshall, to the School Leadership Show. Thanks for joining me for round 2.
My pleasure.
So today we were kind of continue where we left off a little bit last time, but I hate the expression, but we'll take a deeper dive into teacher observation and evaluation. How's that sound?
That's good.
All right. So we had talked a little bit last time, and we kind of got into some best practices in teacher eval. And if you think about, what you've read, your experience, books you've written, where would you point people in terms of what is the most effective? Now, if we had to sort of strip away all the constraints of, state and local regulation and law, where would you go? What's the ideal system look like?
Well, I think the first thing is where not to go, which is the conventional system of pre-observation conference, full lesson observation, detailed note-taking or rubric scoring or evidence gathering, and then post-observation conference after lengthy writing and so forth. That, I think it's pretty clear, is almost a complete waste of an administrator's time, very, very unhelpful to teachers, both because of its lack of frequency, like once or twice a year, but also because of the overwhelming amount of information coming over the transom that is just any athletic coach would know you don't coach someone that way. So that's really all about compliance and documentation and evaluation and not about helping to improve teaching and learning. So the model that I've embraced, stumbled upon as a principal in Boston, and then have elaborated on since then, and written a lot about it, done a tremendous amount of coaching and consulting about is the model of short, frequent, unannounced visits to classrooms to about one a month. It followed promptly by a face-to-face coaching conversation, which can also be pretty short, 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, preferably in the teacher's classroom when kids aren't there, informal, zeroing in on one or two key sort of praise points and then one or two suggestions or questions. And I think the conversation is the critical part of this. This is where really most of the heavy lifting can be done in terms of feedback, praise, and redirection or suggestions, and where also the administrator can become informed about what exactly is going on. Because, of course, the disadvantage of a short classroom visit is you don't know what's going on before you came in or after you left or the broader context. But it has the advantage of being authentic. You're seeing daily reality. And in the conversation, the teacher can broaden your window, can help you understand why this little girl's head was down, or why they decided to depart from the lesson plan, or why there was this particular glitch in the curriculum that needed to be corrected. So it really is an ideal setting. And then very brief documentation after that to keep the whole process down to about a half an hour. 10 minutes in the classroom, 10 minutes conversation, 10 minutes brief write-up. Electronic write-up sent to the teacher. If you're down to a half an hour per observation total, then it's possible to do 2 or 3 of those in a day, along with all the other things that a principal or an assistant principal or department head does. And it becomes possible to get the frequency up to 10 a year or so. and to really have a good ongoing informal coaching relationship with each teacher.
So I want to unpack the different parts of this. So, um, and I think I want to talk about the parts of it. But then I also want to talk about the greater context and how that fits in, particularly into a collective bargaining environment. So keep that in the back of your mind. So
Mm-hmm.
first, the one or two praise points that you mentioned. So how are those framed? What does that look like or sound like?
Well, I think one thing to avoid is saying I liked or I loved, because that makes it all about pleasing the administrator versus impact on kids. So I always advise people, and I advise myself, because I tend to fall into that, to always talk in terms of impact. It was really extraordinary the way your kids were able to engage in a detailed discussion of race relations over a 10-minute period without they're needing to raise their hands and without you directly intervening. Those were extraordinary discussion skills. Tell me how you developed those. Really getting that something that was observable and praiseworthy. And then this is something that I got from Paul Bamrick Santoyo, the Newark charter school leader, who's written a lot about this, getting the teacher to narrate the positive, so that it's really the teacher who's explaining how they got a good result or how they developed a good practice. So the praise point can be fairly short, but the key thing is to be appreciative, to be specific, and to be talking about impact on kids and learning, and then to get the teacher involved in narrating that. So that's the praise part of it. Which again, if things are melting down, you don't praise. But in 99% of the situations, there's going to be something. I do a lot of showing short videos to groups. I did this 4 times last week, and in different districts, and invariably, even with a 7 or 10 minute video, people can notice 6 or 7 different things that are praiseworthy. I mean, in one situation, a video I showed last Thursday, the teacher was giving out bottles of water to kids. Okay, she's hydrating the kids, or has a particularly enthusiastic demeanor, has a great relationship with kids, or the room is really set up nicely, or all of these things. And it's a question of sort of choosing one of those. This is particularly pertinent, especially given what you've seen before, what the school is emphasizing, what the teacher's working on, to praise.
But it sounds like you're focusing on kind of like student behavior or something tangible and evidentiary in the environment. So I saw the students doing this. Tell me how you got there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think more and more what I'm reading and what I'm seeing in the most effective administrators on this is it's all about the kids. It's not so much about teacher behavior. It's about what's having a good effect on how kids are learning. That's what your eyes should be watching.
Now, you sometimes hear not the argument, but the sort of lament from teachers who say, "Oh, if you'd just been here a little before, or if you stayed a little bit longer to see whatever." How do you
Yeah, that's
get that
always
into the
one of
culture?
it's always one of the pushbacks. In fact, every time I present on this, I always describe briefly the theory of short, frequent, unannounced, and systematic visits, and then invite people to talk about their anxieties or their worries, and that's always one of them. The answer to that is frequency. Is to be in enough, and to systematically sample different parts of lessons. The beginning, middle, and end of lessons, different parts of the day, different parts of the week, different subjects with elementary teachers, different groups with secondary teachers, so that you get to the point where the teacher is pretty confident that you're getting a realistic sense of their work. So of course you always miss stuff because it's brief. The trade-off, though, is a once-a-year full lesson observation that's totally, artificial, dog and pony show nonsense, and which means nothing. And teachers, once this gets going, and once there's a modicum of trust established, and administrators are always talking afterward, that gives the teacher a chance to say, well, right after you left, this is what happened, and let me show you these exit tickets. Wow, the kids really got this, or I'm really disappointed, I didn't get, just really opening up and having a conversation. The conversation is so crucial, and I get so discouraged when school districts are allowing administrators to send a quick email or put a checklist in the mailbox or leave a post-it note on the teacher's desk. Go Tiger, great lesson, keep up the good work. This kind of nonsense, rather than a detailed discussion about teaching and learning, which doesn't have to be long, but can be very substantive and gives the teacher a chance to fill in that missing information.
And I think that must put the teachers at ease, because I think that's one of the sources of anxiety for teachers is that, well, if you just pop in at this time, you might not understand the context. You might not know why I'm doing this.
Right. That is a reason, by the way, why seeing unit plans is particularly helpful for administrators. And I'm a big fan of the Wiggins and McTighe backwards curriculum unit design process of just an administrators being part of that, at least, just seeing the plans or observing them or looking over teachers' shoulders. So lesson plans are less helpful, but I think unit plans really get at the bigger picture, the big ideas, the essential questions, and so forth. By the way, on the subject of these conversations, I'm very puzzled that teacher unions have not made a bigger point of insisting on a face-to-face conversation after class. It really seems, if I were a union person, that would be one of my lay my body on the tracks kind of issues, because that gives me a chance to give the bigger perspective, to clue the administrator into what I was up to or what I am up to in general.
Why do you think that is?
Why don't the unions do it?
Yeah.
I think there's a tremendous amount of cynicism about teacher evaluation. I think most people have just concluded it's all nonsense. Let's just set up some protection and get this over with. I think there's very little belief that teacher evaluation, supervision evaluation, can make any difference to teaching and learning. And when I ask teachers, especially audiences of teachers, but also administrators, thinking back on their teaching years, what did make a difference to them as teachers? Universally, it's colleagues, it's teacher teams, it's PLC work, it's my own ingenuity. Sometimes courses and workshops, but mostly it's colleagues.
It's not not the yearly Valentine.
Oh God, no. in fact, I ask anonymous clicker questions with 10 choices, and one of the choices is always, administrators doing evaluation, and that usually gets 0 votes. And I allow people 3 choices, and it always comes in dead last, usually with 0 votes. So I think people are justifiably cynical. But why has it been such a failure? Well, because the process has been fatally flawed. That there are design flaws, infrequent, artificial, anxiety-producing, overwhelming amount of feedback, administrators who may not be that skilled in doing detailed write-ups, all of that. And when you think about it, trying to evaluate a teacher who teaches about 900 lessons a year based on 1 or 2 lessons which are artificial and fraught with anxiety, that's just a dreadful model. No wonder people are cynical.
So you talked about the praise points in terms of starting with what the students are doing and then framing it around that. What about the suggestions? How do you frame those for the teacher in that quick? And those conversations, you're thinking like 5-10 minutes, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think it's important that the administrator jot a few notes in the classroom, not a rubric, not a checklist, not an iPad or anything like that, but just a notepad, jot a few notes and get a couple of quotes and a few observations. And usually, again, when I show a video and I ask for potential criticisms or suggestions on any 7 or 10 minute video clip, there are also, as well as 7 or 8 praise points, there are also 7 or 8 possible suggestions and criticisms. And so you come out of the classroom with several things you might want to talk about, and that's again why the conversation is so crucial. You might actually sound out the teacher. You might actually say something like, "Tell me something you hoped I would notice," or "How did that work out? I saw the beginning of that. Did that pan out okay? Did you get your intended result? Tell me a little what happened after you left. I'm interested in your thinking on this particular point. Tell me that." So I've got a collection of about 12 sort of good open-ended questions to get the teacher talking, to get their thought process, to get them relaxing and really talking about what was going on in the classroom. And again, you widen your window as the administrator, and you get more of a sense of what was going on, and then you may very well have a point of criticism. You may say, well, in the time I was in there, I didn't hear a higher order question. Did I miss something? Did something like that happen? And the teacher may say, you're absolutely right. I didn't, or that you weren't talking to the left-hand side of the room, or that not a single boy talked in this course, or whatever. So you may get to a fairly pointed suggestion or criticism. But I think, again, giving the teacher a chance to give the overall perspective, in addition to, a chance to say something like, I'm having a really bad day, and here's why. Or that this kid is really getting to me, help me out with this. These are really authentic conversations, but what you want is for the teacher to walk away with something, with one or two, usually not more than one, a specific thing. I've really got to focus on checking for understanding more effectively than saying, is everyone with me? And accepting one student saying yes as a signal that everything's fine and I'm going to move on, when a bunch of kids actually weren't with me and didn't understand. Or that I really got to focus on asking more questions that go beyond one-word answers. Or that the classroom management in here is a little ragged, and I've got to develop a look. I've got to get better what we used to say in my school, grip, better hold on things. I've got to use silence more. I've got to use techniques to get everyone with me. Or that I've got to change this curriculum because the kids are bored to tears. So, hopefully teachers, and one of the nice techniques at the end of these short conversations is to ask the teacher, so what's your big takeaway? And get the teacher hopefully to articulate, something that they're walking away with, so that these short conversations are productive. And keeping the process short, so that you come back relatively soon and see how it's going, and maybe pick up on a different point, or maybe come back to that one.
Well, and when I listen to the language that you're using throughout all those examples that you gave in there, you really are coming from a place of presumed competence. It isn't, I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've used the phrase in a teacher observation, you need to. We're not there, but it sounds like you're really trying to kind of to lead them to participate in the thinking about the lesson and the feedback versus you just handing it to them.
Right. Yeah, and there definitely are situations where you say you need to stop that sarcastic tone, or that wasn't funny, or I think being direct, but that comes also from a trusting relationship built over time. And to me, more and more, I keep coming back to this issue of frequency. We've got to get the frequency up to at least monthly, and that seems to be the ceiling for most people that I work with. I was in a district the other day that said, okay, we'll do 8 a year, 8 mini observations. that's closer. But Paul Bambrick Santoyo, in his amazing book Leverage Leadership, he's talking about getting it up to 30 times a year, really being in classrooms once a week. And he maintains that that's possible if you get all hands on deck, you get all teacher leaders involved in this, assistant principals, instructional coaches, department heads. Now, he's working in a charter school world where there may be fewer union barriers to getting teacher leaders involved. But he says if you can get the ratio down to about 12 to 1, then it is possible to get in weekly. He and I are friends, and we debate this. But I must say that in working with most school administrators, and I was in 4 districts last week, 4 different states, most people are pretty challenged to the idea of doing once a month, 10 a year. And I push them hard. I say, look, if you can get this process down to a half an hour, 10 minutes in the classroom, 10 minutes conversation, 10-minute quick write-up, then it is possible. If you can't do 2 or 3 of these a day, which is what it comes down to, usually it's 2 in most schools, 2 a day, keeping that up pretty consistently, that will get you to 10 a year. And the idea that if an administrator can't do 2 half-hour processes, cycles in a day, then things are really, really off the rails in terms of time management.
Well, and it's half-hour processes, but in 10-minute chunks. So,
right.
It's not like you're, because I think of some secondary school administrators who it is busy, and them thinking, well, I can't spend a half hour doing one thing. I'm getting pulled too many places, but 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. What about how do you get the administrators who have been so institutionalized, for lack of a better word, into this idea of pre-conference, observation, post-conference, write-up, and that huge long narrative? When you say, okay, we're talking 10 of these a year, they must flip out. Because they're thinking about what they currently do for writing things up.
Right, yeah. Well, so you got to get them out of that paradigm, and also you got to convince unions and school districts to get away from that model because it's so time-consuming. I was in 2 different districts last week of the 4, and one of them they completely let go. This is in New Hampshire. They completely let go of the traditional thing. Totally let it go. And the union was okay with that. So they're doing totally and even there it was challenging, but I think people saw the logic of it and began to think that it was doable. But in another district in Connecticut, actually, that they were still tied to at least one traditional thing and then maybe 1 or 2 mini observations. That's what New York City is doing also, and it's a fatal mistake because if you're still doing the traditional one, which is so time consuming, ties administrators up in knots, and it's so daunting, then it's very difficult to get a rhythm going with the shorter visits and to break free from that. So it is a leap of faith, and I show a series of slides from the Indiana Jones movie of Indy, being on that precipice and having to get across to the other side and taking the leap of faith. And there is a bridge there, and hidden away in the bridge is, of course, many observations. That's what can get you to the other side in terms of frequency, authenticity, real coaching, and real improvement in teaching and learning.
So what does the write-up actually look like?
So this brilliant computer program from Tennessee that I recommend to everybody, it's called T-Eval, T-eval.com, limits the administrator to 1,000 characters. So it's sort of a super tweak. And it actually, it stops them after 1,000 characters. So what that amounts to is sort of a long paragraph, in which the administrator sums up and begins usually by saying, "As we discussed," because this is coming after the conversation. So
Right.
It's really reinforcing and simply putting it in writing what was decided or what was discussed in the conversation, and maybe making additional suggestions or giving links or resources or pointing them to somebody or asking for follow-up of some kind. But the idea of constraining, computer constraining the administrator to 1,000 characters is one of the most creative and brilliant ideas I've seen in a long time. This guy named Ray Fugit down in north of Chattanooga, Tennessee, came up with this, and he and 2 of his colleagues in their school district have marketed this. And I don't have a financial interest, but boy, do I think they have a good product there. It's t-eval.com. Great product, and has other features. Pull down menus and keeps track of what time of the day you were there, what part of the lesson, and so forth. I suppose other people could replicate this idea, but the general principle is constraining the administrator and forcing them to make their point relatively quickly, sending it electronically, hearing back from the teacher maybe, but usually teachers don't feel the need to write back because they've already had the conversation. This is simply putting it in writing. But these short write-ups then can be monitored by the superintendent or the area superintendent, and also can be, with password access, be accessed by colleagues or discussed in meetings around, how did that come across? Was it too brusque? Was it too blunt? Was it too soft? And really getting better and better at doing these short write-ups so that they have an impact and create a track record that can then be summed up at the end of the year.
So all of this sounds wonderful, and it's great. But what happens, and this is the comment I get when I'm working with administrators and training on observation and evidence collection and all that stuff, it's all great right up until you have to put it on the rubric.
Right.
So how do you coach folks to make that leap?
Well, it's actually not that big a leap. The problem is one of the biggest mistakes is trying to do the rubric in real time in classrooms. That's cognitively impossible, but some people are still trying to do it because they're anxious about sort of keeping track of all these things. It's also a huge mistake to do what New York City and Boston are doing, which is trying to upload, after each observation, to upload rubric scores, because again, it's too soon. You haven't seen the bigger picture. It's unfair to the teacher. And also, if it's shared with the teacher at that point, which it must be, then it sours the coaching relationship because all the teacher's going to remember is the score. It's fundamentally impossible to do rubric scoring lesson by lesson, even, especially with short observations. The leap of faith is that it's possible to do the rubric at the end of the year, and it actually is very quick and easy. So I advocate using the rubric at 3 points in the year, whatever rubric it is, Danielson or Marzano or mine or any other, 3 points in the year. At the beginning of the year, the teacher self-assesses on the entire rubric, circles or highlights, or if it's in a computer program, hits the cell, and gets sort of the overall picture of the different areas of the rubric and how they're doing, and then sits with the administrator and comes up with no more than 3 sort of overall improvement goals for the year. For example, in my case, because I actually scored myself in my last year of teaching, 1981, and looked back and did all 60 items on my rubric, and then stepping back from it was able to say, okay, classroom management is clearly an issue I need to work on here, and here's my plan for that. Differentiation in my learning stations is another big area that jumped out, and then sharing with my colleagues, doing sort of interim assessment analysis with my colleagues who were all working in isolation for me. We really could have gone to town on that. So 3 big improvement goals coming out of that. Okay, so then the rhythm, the routine, the daily, monthly routine of mini observations begins with these short narrative feedback bursts, but no scoring, unless the teacher's in deep trouble, in which case you need to score and give an improvement plan. But in 99% of the time, it's going to be narrative feedback based on specific coaching points each time. Of course, in each of these visits, the administrator is seeing a lot of other stuff, and it's coming up in the conversations, and the administrator is seeing the teacher in action with parents and with colleagues and doing PD and running the chess club or whatever else. So then at the midpoint in the year, around January, both the administrator and the teacher fill out the rubric as best as they can, meet, and compare page by page and discuss disagreements. So this surfaces any sort of major disagreements. Okay, the teacher's giving herself all highly effectives on everything. The administrator's not buying that, and it's not what he's seeing. And they have a discussion, but usually teachers are actually harder on themselves than administrators, or are in the ballpark. So you zero in, just graphically putting page by page, you can see very quickly where the disagreements are. So you discuss the disagreements. And that doesn't count as formative, but it's very helpful to the administrator to know, are we in the same ballpark here? And of course, also the teacher is filling the administrator in on stuff they haven't seen yet, or that they've seen and misunderstood, or that they've seen and have some evidence for real concern. So that's a good 20, 30-minute discussion mid-year with each teacher. Then that process is repeated at the end of the year, whenever the contractual deadline is for getting the rubric scoring done. And again, you've painted this as a daunting thing. It's only daunting if you haven't been in the classroom a lot, if you haven't had conversations with the teacher, and if you don't know what you're doing. But the rubric has a great virtue of drawing out of your memory a lot of information about how the teacher is doing. But what's crucial is the teacher's input. The teacher filling it out also, comparing and really talking about evidence. Okay, so you think you're highly effective at that. I think you're effective. Tell me a little bit more about that. Or I think you're ineffective here. You say you're developing. Well, tell me. Let's talk about that. Here are my concerns. And I think it really can be a very quick and efficient process. What you don't want to do, though, is to burden the administrator with providing evidence for all 60 things on the rubric. Now, that's a disaster. I ran across that in Roosevelt, Long Island. I think they've abandoned this now, but they had a program that created a splitter with each line of the rubric, and the administrator was obligated to provide evidence. And again, there you're turning what should be about a 30-minute process into a 5-hour nightmare.
Wow. And I don't think Roosevelt's alone with that. I think that's going on a lot more than we might care to believe.
Yeah. Well, again, it's this sort of obsessive legalistic concern with evidence, and you mentioned evidence before. I think this is the downfall of a lot of the processes, is insisting on evidence. Now, if you're firing a teacher, you need evidence. But if you were fine-tuning, coaching, and tweaking teachers, and encouraging and praising, it's not necessary to have huge amounts of evidence. The rubrics are very carefully written, well worked out definitions of teaching at 4 levels usually, in great detail. And by simply circling or highlighting the level of proficiency on that 4-point scale, that the rubric is doing the talking there. The rubric is providing the specific description of whether this is effective or highly effective. If you're talking about questioning in classrooms or checking for understanding or classroom management, it's all in the rubric. You don't need a whole lot of additional narrative to give the teacher extremely helpful and detailed information on how they're doing.
So we're bumping up against our time here. I want to be sensitive to your time. Anything else is, kind of words of wisdom, parting shots that you would give to folks who maybe they're entering into their negotiations with their teachers association and they want to try to go down a different road and get away from that cumbersome process. What would you suggest?
Well, the big overall word is trust. If people don't trust their administrators to be fair, then they're going to try to set up roadblocks and barriers. Announced observations. I mean, Chicago is the poster child. Probably has the worst teacher evaluation system in the galaxy. And there it was all about mistrust, and the union saying, okay, we got to have announced observations. We got to have evidence for everything, and there each observation takes 6 hours. Each single observation is a 6-hour process.
Wow.
So that's a nightmare. So trust is essential, but I think you can also build in some things that will build trust. For example, face-to-face conversations after each observation. Guarantees that there's going to be enough observations to see the bigger picture of the teacher's work. A process of narrative feedback rather than scoring, so that the teacher isn't getting uptight every single time. Now, of course, if a teacher was anxious, they could ask the administrator in October, "How am I doing? Let's look at the rubric. How am I doing? Am I okay?" And usually the answer is, "You're doing fine. I've got a couple of concerns here, but overall you're doing fine. And now let's get back into the details of how you're handling these kids and how your learning stations are working and so forth." So I think building trust. I think having a model. Every time I work on this, and I'm doing 4 presentations in 3 states this week, including California. Every time I describe this, there's initial skepticism. It seems kind of crazy to do these short visits, but in just an hour or so, I can, especially showing a video, I can convince people that this is by far, far better way of building relationships and improving teaching and learning. It's just. But just one other thing is that these observations and conversations and rubric scoring, this is necessary but not sufficient. There really are, and I missed this stuff when I was a principal and didn't get to it yet. But I left 13 years ago. But now I see pretty clearly that there have to be several other components. One is teacher teams have really got to have the time to do good curriculum planning, unit planning work, so that it isn't just lesson by lesson, but it's also the bigger picture of the unit. And I think Wiggins and McTighe, and a tragic loss of Grant Wiggins, who died 3 months ago, but the work will go on, and Jay McTighe is soldiering on, and they've got all their books and publications and templates and so forth. So unit planning is crucial. The second thing is good PLC work, professional learning community work, of teacher teams, like the 4th grade team, sitting down periodically and looking at student work and and the principal dropping in on that and monitoring that process. And potentially that could be one of the most powerful levers for improving teaching and learning, is colleagues discussing common assessments on a regular basis, like at least every 6 or so weeks. And then another ingredient that's being talked about more and more in New York State your state is looking at this seriously, is looking at student feedback on their teachers. And the work that's been done on this by Ron Ferguson at Harvard and the Tripod Project and by other groups, Panorama and other groups, is very convincing that the kids have clear perceptions of what's going on in classrooms, even down to the kindergarten level. And if they're asked with appropriate questions in an appropriate format, for feedback on their teachers, not popularity, but specific feedback. Does my teacher help me understand? Does my teacher care about me? Questions. Do the kids in this class respect the teacher? I think this is terrific feedback for teachers, but I think it should not be used as a formal part of evaluation. I think it should be used for feedback to teachers twice a year. Administrators sitting with teachers and going over the data from the kids, hopefully electronically, so it's very quick, and really asking the teacher, what strikes you here? What are you pleased with? There's a lot of good news here. What are you surprised about? And maybe what are 1 or 2 things that you can improve? Some people would like to see the data go only to the teacher, not to the administrator, and that again is because of distrust and how administrators will use it. The big mistake here is using it for high stakes. I think it's Pittsburgh. It's the data from the students are 15% of teachers' evaluation. I think it's an enormous mistake. I think this should be medium stakes. It's important. It's done. Everyone has to do it, but But it's all about improving teaching and giving teachers feedback from their kids, most of which will be probably pretty positive, but there might be some things that really do strike a teacher as, oh my gosh, I really got to work on that. But the kids actually, the Gates study, the MAT study, Measures of Effective Teaching study, found that the kids' feedback was the most accurate of all the three that they looked at. They looked
In
at
terms of
classroom observations
predicting
by
achievement,
administrators.
right?
I'm sorry?
And predicting achievement, too?
Yeah. The kids were, and it's not surprising because they're there all the time.
Right.
But they're really asked, and I think that as a third component, a third stream of information to administrators, well, really a fourth: classroom observations, unit planning, PLC work, and student feedback. I think if all those channels of information are coming into administrators as they watch teachers, talk to teachers, move around their buildings, I think they'll have a very clear picture at the end of the year of what's going on. And then, in addition, the teacher's input on the rubric. I think there you can put together, I think, a very fair thing. The mistake, again, is making it all too high stakes, and New York and New Jersey have both fallen into this thing of points going into the state and teachers being very, showing up at evaluation conferences and saying things like, I need 6 more points. This is not a good dynamic. And I think this too shall pass, and we'll understand that the rubric scores are good, but they're for the end of the year, and they're not for high stakes. They're not for merit pay or anything like that. They're for information to improve your teaching and to constantly get better.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. So, Kim Marshall, you have a memo to work on. So I don't want.
That's right. I got to finish it up.
Where can people go to learn more about your work and follow what's going on in your world?
So MarshallMemo.com is my website, and most of it is free. Almost all my writing is there, except for the Kaplan articles, are freely available under Kim Publications. So go to www.marshallmemo.com and help yourself.
All right. Thanks again for coming on for round 2.
My pleasure. Keep up your great work.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders by school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. Consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And please pass the show along to your colleagues.